So the last time I did a video like this, I was surprised people said the audio was alright. I mean, after making a bunch of videos, you sort of get erotic about the audio. But if people are fine with the audio, then we can keep making videos like this. The topic of the day is genetic engineering. Because I listened to the second episode of the Hypermodernity podcast with Michael and John, and I think Dominic is the third guy. And they talked about singularity, and they talked about artificial intelligence, and basically Dominic was putting forth the idea that the singularity or artificial intelligence, AI, is the new form of the alien. That in the past, the UFO, the alien, was the gods or the fairies, or the way that sort of this spiritual medium or mythic context in which we fit our anxieties, our hopes, our emotionality. So he was making this point that it's not really UFOs anymore, now it's artificial intelligence. And John was describing the limits of artificial intelligence, stating that computers compute. They are computing machines. They do not capture the non-computational aspects of the human mind. So maybe creativity or emotionality or spirituality or vitality. Since computers can't copy these things, according to John, then artificial intelligence is a dud. It's a myth. It's not real. And I've heard these arguments from many people in many different ways. And I'm at the point where, very similar to other controversial topics, I'm just done arguing the point. I do not care to argue the point. I'm not interested in arguing the point. And I'm just going to concede the point that artificial intelligence is impossible. Now, personally, I lean toward it being possible, but if the experts say it's impossible, if there are all these very spiritual arguments about how it's impossible, I can concede that. What it doesn't change for me is the possibility of genetic engineering, which I don't hear being addressed. And I think it's sort of it is a weird, it's something I hear in general. So now I'm not criticizing anyone in particular, but it's something that I hear in general when we start to talk about the future, when we start to talk about paradigm shifts, when we start to talk about science and technology and acceleration of trends, social trends, that people sort of focus in on artificial intelligence as a straw man, in my opinion. Not to say that, again, I personally, I guess you could say I'm agnostic. I'm not really opposed to the concept that artificial intelligence could take off. But I'm also open to the idea that it's all a fantasy. But that argument seems to be a total distraction, because the main point of what should be discussed is the question of whether science and technology has the potential to accelerate certain social and biological human mechanisms and post-human mechanisms. I think that we are headed toward post-humanity rather than I'm not a transhumanist, because transhumanism as a brand has been tied up with this artificial intelligence. And I don't rest my claims on artificial intelligence. Again, I think that's a narrowing of the field. I think that is taking something which is a very broad question of post-humanity, and you're narrowing it to this question of artificial intelligence. And so people get into these pedantic arguments, highly sophisticated, esoteric arguments about the nature of the consciousness in the mind, and could a computer ever really be conscious, and can computers actually replace us and compete with us in XYZ area? I mean, of course, it seems that they're fully functional in terms of becoming like a clerk or a server at a restaurant, a fast food restaurant. It's clear that robots really can replace humans in all these low-skilled jobs. I think it's clear that robots can replace humans in truck driving. And once you replace truck drivers and fast food workers and retail workers, I mean, you've pretty much wiped out a significant portion of the workforce, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the workforce. already with the technology we already have. We're just merely perfecting it. It's already been proven in terms of a concept that 50% of humans who are living today in the West are effectively obsolete, which is to say nothing of the manufacturing that goes on in China and India and Africa and the third world. There it's probably much higher, around 60, 70, 80, 90% of people who are essentially, with respect to the economy, they're obsolete. Now, obsolescence as a term is economic reductionism, for reducing humans to economic units, and that's a further discussion there. But I think artificial intelligence, already we're feeling the impact of that. We'll continue to feel the impact of that. In some senses, I would say artificial intelligence begins with literature and literacy and the alphabet. That with alphabet, with language, with the written word, you are taking a function that was previously fulfilled by messengers. That is, the king would tell the messenger, hey, go to the other king of the neighboring nation and tell him XYZ. Well, the messenger would have to memorize that and take a long journey and meet the other king and tell him exactly what was said. That was a human function. But the messenger, in a sense, he became partially obsolete, or his abilities were artificially augmented with the technology of literacy. So now he didn't have to memorize, he just had to carry a message. And he didn't even have to be literate. He just had to deliver it to the king in a language that the king could understand. So already, I think the invention of alphabets several thousand years ago, and there's some evidence from the Balkans. There's a pre-Indo-European Balkan civilization that existed prior to the civilizations of Egypt and the Middle East. And this, it's possible that this civilization had an alphabet very long ago. We're talking about 8,000 years ago, so 6,000 BC. And quite long ago, even before the Indo-Europeans and before the Egyptians and Sumerians. So literacy is very, very old, and it is a kind of artificial intelligence or augmenting of human capacities. It's a type of technology, and it changes social reality. It changes what's possible. It dislocates the human experience from the immediacy of the moment, and it introduces abstraction. And it creates what I term post-humanity. I think that humanity, Homo sapiens, is a hunter-gatherer species which originated in Africa, just to take the mainstream story for you, which pretty much didn't have literacy, didn't even have fire, didn't have the wheel, didn't really have very complex, you could say complex social orders in the same way that chimpanzees have complex social orders, but these are Dunbar's unit tribes of, 100 to 200 primates, essentially. Primates without tails, primates without hair, or they have hair on their heads, but they're mostly hairless. They're running around Africa, and they're hunting, and they're gathering, and they might not even have clothes at this point. This is early Homo sapiens. This is early humanity. In some ways, this is the Neanderthals. So these are people who, like animals, are pretty much born with everything that they need. They don't really need to learn a whole lot in terms of, maybe there's some linguistic cues. The origins of language gives us a little bit of a murky boundary there. When does language originate? Where does it originate? Did the Neanderthals have language? Did they have oral language? Did they have sign language? Right, so language itself is a form of technology because it's not something we're born with. It's something that we learn. Memetics differentiates us from other species who do have signs and signifiers. They have the ostensive. They have ways of pointing to and gesturing to and alerting members of the community of a predator or gesturing toward prey or whatever. So language does exist among animals, but humans have developed it to the point where we have these learned signs and signifiers that are very complex, that are not obvious, that differ from group to group. Chimpanzees, you could say, they point. They use pointing, they use screeching, they grin. Grin is actually a sign, I believe, of fear and aggression for chimpanzees, partially because they have these big canines. But there are different expressions that chimpanzees use that are pretty much, they seem to be fairly genetic. And the reason why is because if you look at separated tribes of chimpanzees, they all seem to exhibit the same kind of communicative behaviors. Whereas human beings, our communicative language is extremely differentiated based on where you are in the world and what tribe of humans you're looking at, even within 50 miles of one another. In the case of pre-Columbian California, you had these mutually unintelligible languages, completely separate languages within 50 miles of one another. So this is already a technology. And so the invention of language for me is the beginning of what I call post-humanity. That is, humans are no longer the human animal, but they're transcending and they're moving towards something beyond humanity. And so the invention of language for me, it marks the beginning of a very long acceleration. And we could, in mathematical terms, we would call this geometric, right? So it starts off slow, right? The invention of language, I don't know when that happens. There's a lot of dispute because very little archaeological evidence can tell us when language was actually developed or how it was developed, which is why generative anthropology is such a speculative subject. Necessarily, it seems almost impossible that we'd ever get hard evidence, because if something's oral, then it's not going to leave traces behind. It's only once you get written language that it enters into the archaeological record. So with written language, this is still a technology that ushers in this post-human trend. And so at first, language is quite integrated with the animal consciousness. This is the pre-magical consciousness prior to Gebser. We're talking about an animal consciousness. That is, humans might recognize themselves in the mirror. Or when I say conscious means you're aware of what you're doing. You understand who you are. You have an identity, Freudian like ego, superego, id. We can talk about consciousness in that way. I mean, the definition of consciousness already is quite complicated. But at the very least, we can say that when humans have language, that the introduction of language is not so disruptive that, humanity goes extinct. Humans are able to adapt to this new linguistic field, this new linguistic Umwelt, this environment, this socially constructed psychological network, which is why I say the internet is not a new thing. The earliest form of internet is language. The internet connects people, it connects nodes over distance. That means you can listen to this video even though you're not in the same time frame as I am. You're also not in the same geographical location as I am. You're somewhere far off at some point in the future. That's what the internet does. It unites people over distance and it unites people over time. Well, that's also what language does. Language takes things in the past and it says, yesterday we found food. Tomorrow we will find food. So already language allows past future tense come in and allow for the separation of the subject from the present moment, from the immediacy of the flow state, the animal consciousness, and allows the human being to be transformed into a being of time. Time is introduced. Before you have the timeless present, right? The flow state, you're playing sports, you're on the hunt, you're having sex, you're eating food, everything is immediate. There's really no need to think about the future or the past. You simply act according to instinct, like the beaver builds the dam, not because the beaver is thinking about the future, but because genetically, instinctively, the beaver just feels, literally, the beaver's like getting a dopamine hit from making the dam. Like when you play Minecraft and you're making your fort in Minecraft, you're not making your fort because you think, well, me playing Minecraft is a good use of my time. This is a good investment. I'm sure women are going to be attracted to me because I play Minecraft. I'm sure I'm going to make money from Minecraft. That's not really what most Minecraft players are thinking. Maybe a select few Let's Players may have justifications like that. But most people playing Minecraft, they simply do it because it feels good. Now, at the same time, you can make a justification. Oh, well, people like playing Minecraft because it relates to our evolutionary, history of building shelters and interacting with our environment. Same thing for the beaver. You can use evolutionary psychology on the beaver to say, well, the beaver, he likes to, make the dam because it's helpful for him to be able to, change his environment so he can get fish or whatever he's trying to do. But the consciousness of the beaver in that moment, the beaver is not conscious of the reason why he is doing what he's doing. In the same way, we're not necessarily conscious of why we have sex when we have sex. There is an evolutionary psychology. There's a justification of, okay, well, we have sex because ultimately for reproduction. However, in the moment, you're not thinking about the end result. You're not thinking about the evolutionary justification. That is the state of animals, and that is the state of human beings prior to language. We're not thinking of why we do things. We just do things. We just act and we react. And there's no intermediary language. There's no intermediary technology. There's no augmentation. We are in this natural pre-Edenic state. We are like Adam and Eve in the garden. Well, Adam and Eve had language, so that myth doesn't entirely apply, but we're in a natural state. There's no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as good and evil. We simply are, and we do as we do. There's no there's no like, oh, I feel bad about doing that. I feel guilty about that. I feel shame about that. You simply do what feels good in the moment. So, you have sex, and if having sex with the wrong partner gets you, beat up by the alpha male of the tribe, then that feels bad, so you don't do that in the future. But you don't feel guilt or shame for having sex. When we get the knowledge of good and evil, I think this really corresponds in a big way with language. I think you need language in order to have morality. You need your logos, you need signs and signifiers before we can begin to have pathos in a proper sense, in a human sense. Now, maybe you could say that elephants are empathetic toward one another, or the mother cares for her children in the animal kingdom, but that's not the same thing as morality. Morality is not animalistic pathos. It's not the sense in which the mother cares for the children. Morality is not instinctual. Morality is something learned. So morality is a second order form of language. That is, language is a syntax which governs signs and signifiers. Morality is a syntax which governs behaviors. And so you really need the more basic level of language before you can start constructing moral rules. So these are all technologies, and these are post-human technology. These are augmentations that go beyond our animal instincts as human beings and transform us and make us into something greater and point to something beyond humanity. And this is at the beginning of language. This is at the beginning of morality. And this is what Nietzsche called like the priestly mentality. And he criticizes the priestly mentality because he says it's anti-human, it's anti-life. In certain ways, Heidegger follows Nietzsche in a much more, Heidegger is, I guess, less exciting to read, less passionate, kind of lame by comparison. But Heidegger's basically saying the same thing. Heidegger's saying, look, the priestly mentality is evil. It's anti-human. It's anti-life. And we need to reintegrate with the present. We need to stop thinking about the future path and the past. We need to get into the present. But what I'm saying is this problem is not a problem of the 19th century. This problem is not of the Industrial Revolution. It's not of the Enlightenment. It's not of Christianity, which a lot of pagans like Nietzsche and even Heidegger to an extent want to attack Christianity. Oh, it's all Jesus's fault. We need to get rid of Jesus. He did this. No, Jesus was a solution to a problem. Jesus came because people were alienated. Jesus didn't invent alienation. Christianity didn't alienate people from their pagan ancestors. People were already alienated from their pagan ancestors. And so they were in a state of nihilism. And that's when Christianity came. New things can only come when old things are decaying and rotten. Paganism was decaying and rotten. And so Christianity came to give salvation to the people of the Mediterranean, and really to the people of the world in a wider sense, because he was addressing conditions that had appeared at that time in that place, and which do appear in other times, in other places throughout history, as we progress toward what I call post-humanity. So again, it's not Jesus's fault or the Enlightenment or the 1960s or any of these conservatives like to say, oh, well, here's the moment when everything went rotten. Well, if we want to say everything went rotten, then we'd have to mark the beginning as language and as morality, and not as with Christianity or the 1960s or any other point in history. But it's really, that's the moment at which we start moving into post-humanity. That's the moment at which we start to go through a transition phase where we're no longer bounded up by our instincts and by our animal nature. And all of a sudden we're freed up and we're liberated to start making choices and to start projecting potential futures and to start feeling guilty and shameful about the past. This is what the Bible says. Adam and Eve were told, hey, just be like animals. Just be naked, just run around the forest, eat the fruits of the trees, just live like animals, everything will be fine. But Adam and Eve didn't do that. They ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And therefore they became ashamed. And therefore they became guilty. And they began to wear clothes. And they started to become violent. And they started to become jealous. And they started to have morality. And they started to get other commands. At first, God, he didn't give any complicated commandments. He didn't say don't commit incest. He didn't say don't do this, don't do that. He didn't say honor the Sabbath. God didn't give any commandments. He didn't give any laws. All he said was just don't have knowledge of good and evil. Just live like an animal and you'll be like an animal like all the other animals. But humanity went beyond itself. Humanity went beyond those bounds and those limits. And humanity went into language and humanity went into morality. And when humanity did that, humanity began to attack itself and erode its own animal nature. That's what Nietzsche means when he says the priest is anti-life, the priest is anti-human. What he really means is the priestly nature of language and morality is in eternal opposition to our instincts, to the flow state, to the path of the warrior. When the warrior fights a battle, when we engage in violence, we hearken back to our animal instincts. And so we see the reappearance of the dominance of the human as animal. And so when we attack violence, when we become pacifists, when we become vegetarians, when we engage in this priestly thought and these priestly habits, we're pushing beyond humanity. We're actually attacking the human animal. And we're seeking to transcend the human animal and go beyond it. And this evolves through language, through morality, up through all literature and literacy. Literacy is a new expansion of this. So Hesiod, he takes the Greek myths, which up to that point were transmitted by an oral tradition, and he starts writing them down. And language and mathematics are not two different things. We have this pop science that tells us, oh, well, the left side of your brain is the math side and the right side is the language part. That is total bunk. That is totally wrong. It's totally false. That's not to say that some people don't have higher verbal intelligence and other people don't have higher mathematical intelligence. But as a complete and utter generalization, it's putting people far off the mark. When you look at really the invention of mathematics by people like Pythagoras, and you look at the same time, the cultural development. It's not that the Greeks invented the alphabet around the time of Hesiod. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that Hesiod took the sacred myth of the Greek people and he put it into writing. And when he put it into writing, he gave it signs and signifiers which hitherto had been used for transactions, for mercantile purposes, for such and such has this much grain and he promises to give such and such to the king or whatever. Currency, you can say. These are all signs and signifiers which are secular. That is, they are dislocated from the emotionality of experience. When the Greeks would transmit their myths prior to Hesiod, they would do so in song. They would sing aloud. They would use rhyming. They would use poetry. They would use cadence. They would have drums and they would have flutes. And it was a spectacle. It was a ritual. There was something emotional about it. When Hesiod begins to write the myths down, he denatures them. He desacralizes them. So this isn't something that Christianity did. This is something that, it's not even something Pythagoras did. It's not even something Plato did. When, again, you get these conservative warrior types who want to attack the priest, they want to attack him as, oh, well, we can all trace this to this one guy. Here's when he messed it all up. But there is no one guy that we can just go back in time and kill him as a baby. There's no one guy who can say, well, he did all the mistakes. If we just go back to the pre-Socratics, everything will be all right. Because there's a clear technological unfolding of post-humanity that comes out of language and morality that leads up to written language that is then further developed by Hesiod. The Greeks already were writing things down. They already had an alphabet. All that Hesiod did is he took the sacred myth and he secularized it. And when he secularized it, when he wrote it down on paper, when he took it away from its ritualized, musical, poetic context, he decontextualized it. He ripped it out of the womb of tradition and he put it on paper. In the same way that the scientists like Aristotle will dissect a frog or cut up a plant and look at the rings of the tree or look at the organs of the frog, Hesiod took the sacred myth and he laid it out bare in writing for everyone to see, and thus it became capable of being dissected. And so he opened up the path for atheism for the Greeks. At the same time in India, which I haven't studied India as closely, but the Charvaka system in India was an atheistic, materialistic system that was coming out pretty much at the same time that Hesiod was doing his thing all the way over in Greece. So it seems that either Parthia was transmitting these ideas across, the Persian plateau, or there's some kind of greater spiritual process that's going on, whatever you want to believe, whether there's some kind of materialistic, whether it's just all this a big coincidence, I don't know. But there's a development that's going on in the ancient world. And to simply say that we can go backwards in time and reclaim our warrior spirit in the nation state, and we will once again be truly human in a Heideggerian sense, this is very ignorant of history. This is people who are, doing what I guess feels good to them concerning, these questions. They're saying, oh, well, I don't like technology. Technology is alienating. And that is true. Technology is not warm and fuzzy and fun and good. Technology is problematic. But the idea, therefore, that we should then just retreat from technology, we don't have that option. We don't have the Ted Kaczynski option. That's not real. That is a fantasy. The internet is real. The connection of nodes via language is real. Heading toward post-humanity is real. Your little Heideggerian, philosophy project, your little nation state is not real. That is the fantasy. So when people say, oh, well, you should meet in the real world, stop spending so much time on the internet, it's like the internet is the real world. You're clinging on to a fantasy of the past. Now, again, I'm using exaggeration. Obviously, there's utility for meeting people in the real world. And I'm exaggerating because I'm pointing toward a future, but we have to bring it back at the end of the day because, of course, I know there are going to be people who take me literally word for word. They're going to say, oh, well, do you really not believe there's any benefit, blah, blah, blah. We're in a transition state. And so when I make these extreme statements, I'm pointing toward a future that we're headed toward. I'm making predictions. I'm acting as a prophet. But obviously, in the present day, we still have to meet face to face. We still have to have sex if we want babies. We still, have to go to the grocery store. We still have to drive our cars. We aren't there yet, but we're headed there. And we have to be mindful of this. If we care about the future, if we care about our descendants, if we care about what happens, then we have to make decisions based on the truth. If you don't care about the future, if you're just living in the moment, well, shine on you, crazy diamond. But if you do care about the future, then you have to think differently. So that's the post-humanity. That's the genetic engineering. I didn't really get into the technicality of genetic engineering, but I don't know. The argument seems pretty self-evident to me. I was going to look at some of the Discord comments. Cromwell is, he is my biggest fan. He just loves my Discord. Let's see if there's anything good coming out of Cromwell. I'm trying to see. I myself was incarcerated. Has Cromwell deleted everything? I'm thinking that Cromwell has started to delete some of his messages. I wonder if there's a way for me to see that as an admin. I'm not too experienced with Discord. So by the way, the video has ended, and now we're going into the comments section. I guess this is what I have to do since I'm not live streaming. I have to go to comments. What does Kenneth stand for, says Cromwell. Last time I checked, he was telling his followers to vote for Biden. Biden, the political mastermind. So, taking a joke seriously, can we use the A word? I don't know if we could use the A word. But here's a person who doesn't understand jokes and who takes everything very literally and has a computational mind. Let's see. Elites don't determine the course of history. That's just a very stupid thing to say. They have spent years on this project and it's falling apart. Even if that was true, that just says these elites are failing and they're going to be replaced by other elites. I mean, that as a categorical statement, elites don't determine the course of history. It's just such a stupid thing to say. That's why I want to engage. That's why I don't ban Cromwell from the Discord, because I'm hoping he'll come on the channel and have a discussion or an argument or just we scream at each other, because it's so infuriating. But the fact is, the thing about Cromwell, the reason I respect Cromwell, even though we are enemies, the reason why I respect Cromwell, Hangus, Chatsy Therapy, whatever he calls himself, I respect him because he's taking this idea, this liberal ontology that the masses have power, that the average person matters in the course of history. He's taking this idea which we're sold as little kids when we go through grade school. We're taught democracy is where every person gets a vote. And this is a government for the people, by the people. And the American Republic was founded by our founding fathers in our Constitution. And this is something that's spread out from America to all over the world, right? With the spread of democracy, it's not just particular to America, but everybody gets a mouthful of this. So he's repeating these lines, but he's doing so in an absurd way that shows the connection between nationalism and democracy. He's showing the democratic quality of nationalism, that certain people, Juliano. I'm thinking of alternative names for people. Mr. We'll have to think of a nickname. But Julian. It's funny the things you have to do on YouTube. Julian did this. Julio, whatever we want to call him. Julio was saying this back in the day, that nationalism is fundamentally democratic, and therefore it doesn't really understand what's going on. It's not a good way to view the world. Let's see if we have any other good things here. All right. I didn't claim to be personally winning. I'm claiming the tide of history is on the side of nationalism. You compare the gains the far-right parties made in Europe. They're much higher today than they were 5 years ago. I want to further English interests. There isn't many immigrants who call themselves English. They're usually polite enough to refer to themselves as British. States possess certain autonomy. Okay, well, who leads the state? Is it the people or the elites? It's not a case of, oh, I want some idyllic little nation states. It's actually the reality of the situation. Okay, well, I don't know. Have you ever heard of the Freemasons? Have you ever heard of like international banking or finance? Have you ever heard of the United Nations? Have you ever heard of the League of Nations? Have you ever heard of the Great Depression? Was the Great Depression What was the Great Depression? What was the financial collapse of 1929? Does that back up this idea that nation states are fully autarkic and autonomous? I grant that elites compete within the international scene, and that when nationalism was strong as an ideology between 1848 and 1945, the century of nationalism really saw a delineation between elites on the basis of national borders. Of course, you did have men like Admiral Canaris, who were part of the German hierarchy, who were part of a, Anglo Freemasonic international order that ultimately influenced Franco, if not controlled Spain. It was a heavy influence there. So even at the height of nationalism, it was still a very internationalist system, and continues to be today. And I don't know. This is an empirical question, and this guy is such a fanatic that he's never going to change his mind. But again, the reason why I'm doing this is because he's a fanatic who is emblematic of a cult that takes smart people and makes them dumb. There are smart people who really think nationalism is rising. And I think that there's a lot of human capital there. There's a lot of potential there of people who are intelligent, but for emotional reasons and because no one's ever questioned their assumptions. I mean, these are normally what nationalists contend with is it's like, here's another leftist saying that diversity is our strength and we are all just going to get along, and that's stupid, and therefore, that if that's the only alternative to nationalism, then of course nationalism is right. But that's essentially, I won't say a straw man, because there are people who are genuinely, I would say, who genuinely believe in that. And so it's not a straw man to argue against that, because that is quite a popular position, among the general left aisle. But that is not the strongest argument against nationalism. And so they're taking one that is, they're taking an argument that is weak and popular, and they're viewing that as the only opposition. They're not actually seeking out strong arguments. They're not actually asking a basic question. How long has nationalism been around? Don't you think that would be an important question to ask? How long has it been around? Is it an eternal idea? There's a language game that goes on where they say, well, ethnicity has always existed, and therefore nationalism has always existed. Well, okay, ethnicity has always existed. First of all, that's something to unpack, but let's take that for granted. Ethnicity has always existed. Does that mean that the nation state is the obvious political order, or that internationalism is impossible and unworkable? I think we see throughout history that internationalism is not just possible, but it is facilitated by technology, and as technology becomes more integrated with humanity, internationalism becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, and localism becomes less and less possible. And the nation state is an arbitrary delineation, saying that we cannot have internationalism and we can't have, anarcho-capitalism, but the nation state is the perfect harmonious medium. Well, maybe it was, given the level of technological integration between 1848 and 1945. I still doubt that because of the existence of Freemasons like Giuseppe Mazzini, Wilhelm Marr, Richard Wagner, who led those revolutions, who are integral to them, who themselves were ultimately internationalists and pan-Europeans and all the rest. So the people who invented nationalism didn't believe in nationalism. Marx was a nationalist. He promoted the idea that, the Germans should have a German state, the French should have a French state, whatever. He believed in nationalism. He promoted pan-Germanicism. He said, Germans shouldn't fight each other over religious reasons. They should unite on account of their ethnicity. But these people ultimately didn't believe in it. It was an ideology that they thought was useful at the time to deconstruct the existing power structure, not to give the power to the people ultimately, but to transfer power from a warrior aristocracy to a mercantile aristocracy. So if you don't understand this, I mean, we've gone over all this before, but I guess it bears repeating, because as long as there are nationalists out there, as long as there are people like Cromwell, Hengist, Jatsi Therapy, and all the rest, as long as they're out there and they're willing to go to court over the cause of nationalism to fight globalism, we have a problem. We have a problem because I'm seeing intelligent young men, because of an emotional framing of it's, the Democrats versus the nationalists. Well, actually, that's not the real paradigm. That's not really what's going on. So people are getting trapped in this sideshow and they're going to jail over it. There's real consequences. I don't want people to throw away their lives over something stupid. So that is why this bears repeating. Let's see, there's a lot of comments here. Furthering English interests, there aren't many immigrants. The reality of the situation, the nation state is not a fiction. It's a reality which neoliberalism has to navigate around by trying to promote mass immigration in the narrative of open borders. Citizens are subjects of their state, are they not? Again, okay, who controls the state? Do the masses of people control the state? Do masses of people just create ideologies out of the blue like nationalism, or are they invented for them? If that was the case, Brexit would not have won the argument. Okay, what was Brexit? Brexit is one of three things. Either Britain is moving toward China, Britain is moving toward the United States, or Britain is staying in the European Union in everything except name, meaning that they reintegrate economically, they reintegrate with the Schengen zone, and so essentially it's effectively the same thing as being in the European Union. They just pretend to be independent. Those are the three outcomes. There's no third possible outcome. There's no independent, autonomous Britain. Like, you don't understand economics if you're making the claim that nation states are truly independent. I mean, that's part of, the entire thing about World War I and World War II is this issue of the international system led by the Anglo power, pretty much Britain, America, aligned with France because it was anti-German, and Russia because it was anti-German. And then you had this continental German system. And the question was, which was going to be the new international-led order? Was it going to be a German-led order, or was it going to be an Anglo-led order? And it was decided in favor of the Anglos in both wars, but it could have gone the other way. If it had gone the other way, it wouldn't have been a nationalist world. It would have been a globalist world, just led by a different set of elites with a different ideology and different interests. Let's see. You cannot expect to remain in power without conforming to public opinion. That's not true. Public opinion is formed by power. I'm trying to think of the it's not a British guy, but it's the guy who was the advisor to Bill Clinton. The name escapes me at the moment. Advisor to Bill Clinton, or no, I should say mentor to Bill Clinton. I think he was a professor. It was one of the Ivy Leagues, Harvard or Yale or something. So not Mr. Fulbright. Who meant? I don't think he's gonna name who he was, but we'll have to look at. Someone will have to do a fact check for me on the. Boy, I'm doing a big blank at the moment, but it's hard to keep all these facts straight. Anyway, I'll come up with it at some point. Someone's going to come up with it in the comments, so we'll just have to move on. We'll just have to lose out on that one because I'm blanking in my memory in terms of he's like an Anglo-American political theorist of the 20th century, and he looks at, boy, I'm going to feel really bad. The moment I see his name, I'm going to say, how could I forget that guy? But, yeah, power analysis. I don't think you've ever done any power analysis. If you believe that the masses of people create their own ideologies. You have a very crude outlook on the world. What power-hungry states desires a hegemony sphere of influence to further their own interests. Okay, so how does that not lead to globalism? How does that not lead to one, nation state predominating over nation states? We are gradually transforming away from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. Okay, so this guy's just a Duginist. This guy's just a sad Duginist, where U.S. must contend with China, to a lesser extent Russia. Well, that's not a multipolar world. That's a bipolar world. That's the United States versus China. And that hasn't even been thoroughly proven to me. But United States versus China is not a nationalist world. That's not nationalism. Global American empire versus global Chinese empire is two globalisms. That's not nationalism. That's not you get your own little nation state. That's two empires. Do you not understand the difference between an empire and a nation state? This is just like a basic, like tautological, we're talking about semantics and definitions that you don't even know the definition of your own ideology if you think that a Chinese empire and an American empire fighting with each other for control of the globe is somehow a greater, like we're going to have more nationalism. Like, don't you understand we're becoming a multipolar world of America versus China, and that's going to bring in all this nationalism. How does that compute? China versus America, that's less nationalism. That means the Western world is going to speak English and the Chinese, world is going to speak Chinese, and all the little cultures in between are either going to be Americanized or they're going to be Chinified. The individual nation states and cultures are going to get wiped out. Just the same as what's happening in Tibet and with the Uyghurs in China, they're subject to genocide. America's doing the same thing around the world, Americanizing, especially Europe. They're destroying European culture and they're making it into something American. So that's the decline of nationalism, not the rise of nationalism. You went off on some weird tangent, but Beijing is determined to push the U.S. military out of the Western Pacific. That's not the rise of nationalism. That's the rise of Chinese imperialism. The East China Sea, the South China Sea, Taiwan. These are key strategic points implementing aggressive naval strategies. It may surprise you to hear the Chinese are less ideological than the Americans in global affairs. Okay, so he posts some pictures there of different maps. What's the purpose of these maps? Graphics show key regions. He's like responding to some commenters. He's like, oh, well, you just went off on a tangent. And then he just starts map posting. Looking at articles, the influence of sea power upon history. China is an empire. China's principal legitimacy is owed to nationalism. This guy doesn't know what nationalism is. The nationalism, as defined by the 1848 revolutions, means that it's the Wilsonian principle of self-determination. Every ethnicity gets its own political sovereignty. It follows from the concept of sovereignty that you had between Protestants and Catholics, where you say, every prince will get to determine the religion of his principality. You just took that in religious form between Catholics and Protestants, you made that into an ethnic form of ethnic states. You have a German state, you have a Polish state, you have a French state. China is not nationalist. China is committing genocide against ethnic minorities. China is expanding as an empire. I don't know how far it'll expand. None of that is nationalism. That's not a win for nationalism. Nationalism and imperialism are against one another. I don't know how, at this point, I feel like I'm fighting a straw man. Again, because this guy, his points are self-defeating. I don't think the average nationalist is actually this bad at arguing. So I would invite, if people want to make the position that nationalism is rising, I would invite them to come on the channel. It engaged in protectionist policies. I thought this is one of the reasons your Trump won voters in the first place. China's laughing at us. Are you going to continue to be sold by the rhetoric of neoliberals, or are you going to be sold by changing the world order, doesn't care about your ideology? America's the essential component of neoliberalism. Ideology is bumming off Western elites. I'm simply acknowledging the changing world order. I don't think it's one or the other. It's chicken and egg, mass media versus public opinion. Which is influencing the other? It's not simply mass media. This is just objectively false. This is objectively wrong. Why is Bloomberg have 10% in the polls? Is it because people were like, oh, we just really want Bloomberg? Or is it because Bloomberg, with his money, is conducting a mass psychological operation on the American public? How stupid do you have to be to have this much confidence in people that they have the agency? And on a more fundamental level, maybe generative anthropology would have a point here. Like, the individual cannot create an ideology. The individual gets ideology from somewhere else. And the collective doesn't invent ideology all by itself. Elites have the power and leverage to create ideology, to foment, to redefine words. The word racist was created and promoted not by the American public. The American public didn't decide as a part of a democratic populist vote to pass the 1965 Hart-Celler Act. Like, this is basic, like, nationalism, it defeats itself because nationalism is democratic, and yet nationalism has to understand that the world is not a democratic place. Like, democracy and democratic power, the power of the people, does not determine history. And yet nationalism relies on this idea that, you know, ultimately the demos and the ethnos should have all the power. Okay. China does not directly threaten Europe. We will remain a part of the U.S.-bound order, but we do not have the military capabilities to project any sort of power in East Asia, so it's clear that Europe is going to pass the buck on this one to USA and its Asian allies. People are extremely naive and have a very, very crude view of the world. So he admits there that Europe will remain a part of the U.S.-bound order. How is that a victory for nationalism? You have admitted my point. This is the point I'm making. Nationalism is not rising. Europe is integrating into the American empire. That is my argument. That is my anti-nationalist argument. I'm reading the comment here. I don't know where to go with this. There isn't some monolithic power. There are different spheres and must cooperate with one another. This paternalism is childish. It isn't a simple case of masses rising up. I've told you this time and time again, knowledge doesn't exclusively reside among humans. I'm talking of invisible forces of development outside human hands. So he literally believes that God is a nationalist. This is the levels of religious cult mentality that we're getting into. God is a nationalist. Yeah, I mean, again, this is so perfect because he's saying the things that nationalists wouldn't say normally because they would recognize that it sounds ridiculous to just say, oh, well, all my points are wrong. God is a nationalist and God wants Britain to be free and independent. I mean, it's that level of deus ex machina, like I don't have an argument. So I'm just going to say, God wants us to be nationalists. So even though all indicators are headed in the opposite direction, I'm just going to believe that God's going to take care of it. One way or another, the future is nationalism. Right, this is not a belief supported by arguments or empiricism. This is a belief that's just fundamentally religious in nature. And it's not a good religion. See, I'm pro-religion. I think everyone should be part of a cult. I just think you shouldn't be part of a stupid cult. And nationalism is a stupid cult. Whether that pertains to current elites drifting towards that direction or whether it entails a new power, this is the future. If it helps you to comprehend, God loves nationalism. That's not true. How many years of Christian imperialism do we have to look at before we realize that God doesn't care about nationalism? God doesn't care, whether, Vikings rule Russia or Slavs. He doesn't care whether Normans rule England or Anglo-Saxons. He doesn't care. God's favor is not bestowed upon ethnically homogeneous nations in terms of the elite class versus the masses of the people. That doesn't mean that flooding your country with Somalians is going to cause God to bless you. It's not my argument. That's the straw man that nationalists use. They immediately go there. Oh, so you don't believe in homogeneity, so I guess you just want to invite the third world into your country. Or, oh, so you think that like having mass immigration from China is a good idea. It's not what I'm saying. But that's the straw man. What I'm saying is that the idea that the foundation of the state ideology, and that it should be ethnic homogeneity, and that we should sacrifice our lives, our jobs, our careers, our relationships, and we should go to jail over the cause of nationalism is not productive. It's not a good idea. It's not going to accomplish anything. It's just going to get you, you're going to sacrifice much for a fantasy. We can talk about ethnicity. We can talk about immigration. We can talk about these things and the real impact that they have. But to then suggest that the history is headed toward nationalism is just not true. It's just not correct. It is a religious belief. And it's a bad religious belief. The Soviet Union had a total grip on the influx of knowledge, and even if it could not stand, and even, I think he means to say, even it could not stand on the seeds of its own destruction. So again, here's a person who doesn't understand the destruction of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was brought down by elites within the Soviet Union. Gorbachev, the East Germans were ready to treat the revolution like they had in 1956. The Soviet Union said, stand down, we're going to transition to an oligarchy, we're going to have the oligarchs take over the economy. That was the plan. And to some extent, they succeeded. Now, Putin, as a representative of the KGB, had some problems with that. And so there was a reaction against the destruction of the Soviet Union. But the people supported communism. The people did not rise up against communism in a way that would have defeated the system if they had just used 1956 tactics, but they didn't have the heart. They didn't have the Stalinist passion. It was the choice of elites to dissolve the Soviet Union, not the choice of the people. If it was the people who determined the course of history, then 1956 would have gone in a very different way. But I'm supposing you've never heard of 1956. Is there such a thing as truth? Stop believing in the fascist idea. You can project a myth and sell it to the people. It's amazing, the projection. He's literally just doing that and then accusing other people of it. Let's see. There's such a thing as a world mind. I have no clue what that is. I don't care whether you call it God or some form of determinism. Either way, change is the result of historical forces. Yeah, I agree. Change is the result of historical forces. What those historical forces are is not nationalism. The cult of heroes, according to Carlyle, is a myth. Also, many of you have likely been a part of fascist circles on the internet, and I swear most of them act like the ancient sophists who would have made anything true depending on what one chooses to believe in. Universalist utopians tend to think along the same lines. Yeah, I don't know. When you argue for the will of the people and you argue for nationalism, you are literally a fascist. That is literally, like, fascism is just fascism is just nationalism. That's all it is. Like, what is fascism? It's the nation. It is let's have national. It's opposition to globalism. That's all fascism is. So him accusing people of being fascist is a very rich argument. Paternalist arguments are terrible. If they were at all convincing, we'd still be living under monarchies. No, because you don't understand high-low versus the middle. You don't understand the concept of formalism. You don't understand, Juvenalian mechanisms of power. You don't understand the concept that maybe putting yourself out in the open as a powerful person is not the best idea. Maybe you rule from the shadows. So the idea that, if there was such a thing as elites, then of course monarchy would have won. That's terrible analysis. Kenneth said something the other week in regard to monarchies, which are flat out wrong. Royal absolutism was a means toward national unification. As soon as the modern nation state crystallized, they no longer needed monarchs. I actually agree to an extent there. I actually don't disagree, but I think now that we've gone through the period of nation states, they're no longer necessary. I don't believe they were ever real in a deep sense, given the existence of Freemasons and international economics. But to the extent that nationalism as an ideology was being promoted, it's no longer necessary. It just so happens to be that the internet has provided a web of confusion. A little knowledge can be a terrible thing. Nationalists have the best arguments once you can see through everything. Just so happens we have a bunch of fascist, reactionary morons online who make terrible arguments. They get bunched in with the rest of us. The future doesn't care about the past. All I have to say about that. So he's got a very niche ideology where he's a hyper-nationalist, but he's anti-fascist. It's only English people could engage in this level of, I don't know what to call it. It's like a very particularist, individualist, like, I'm going to go off. It's a very Viking mentality. I'm going to go off into the hyper-nationalist realm of anti-fascist. I'm an Antifa nationalist. This is what Cromwell is, the Antifa nationalist. You do not believe in truth. You ultimately believe is a crumbling tower. I recognize the state is the highest authority. Okay, who rules the state? Internationally, it is anarchy. That's not true. As far as ethnic concerns, of course, they are valid. Of course, I want my nation to have its own state. Who'd want to be like the Kurds? If you're deracinated, I don't think you should have any claim in politics. Ultimately, you wouldn't. And then he's arguing for racism. I don't need to have any sentimentality. I am passionate. I do not impose politics on my morality. I don't even know what that means. Self-interest and group interest are one and the same thing if you're lower on the social hierarchy. He sounds like he's pretty low on the social hierarchy. I don't think you are appreciating where my position is derived. It's derived from what is imperative. There is cold-hearted rationality to every single point I'm making. Explain the actions of states in Hobbesian-like terms. The emotional claims are coming from your end. I stated I am passionate for what I believe to be true, but the axioms on which my beliefs are based are extremely rational. It is also backed up by what is observable, the fact that all of a sudden you care about a certain people when, say, 10 years ago you weren't even thinking in these terms. Due to levels of indoctrination, these weren't your ideas, they were forced upon you. Yeah, so you're proving the fact that the majority of people don't invent their own ideas, thus disproving the idea that nationalism is viable. Kenneth has made it clear he doesn't want to be associated with racism, so he jumps on the diversity train and considered himself intelligent. There's no loyalty to that. I haven't jumped on the diversity train, but whatever. That's you can post comments and be afraid to come on YouTube, but I'm gonna be here. I'm gonna be here on YouTube and saying what is true. I believe hierarchy will exist no matter what. In terms of power dynamics, there will always be a few and a many. The relationship between the rulers and the ruled is fundamentally different in modern society. Yeah, people are ruled even more effectively than they were before. The rulers cannot survive without the consent of the ruled. And here's a term for you: manufactured consent. Look that one up. That is not derived from John Locke's fantasies. It's something which can be purely observed. Now I know this is the demon who's come to haunt me since I read John Locke. So he saw I was reading John Locke and he said, "Ooh, it's my time to shine. I've been waiting for this all my life." This is what happens when we read John Locke. To what extent is society influenced by the state? You Machiavellian wannabe. How is it that you attack Machiavelli but you support Hobbes? Like, I just don't understand. I'm a hyper-nationalist, but I hate fascism. I like Hobbes, but I hate Machiavelli. Equality is something which is intrinsic in man himself. Here we go. He says, I hate John Locke, but I love equality. Oh my goodness. Our egalitarian ideals are rooted in modern society. I think this is just, can I say the S word? Can I say this guy is totally divorced from reality, and like his arguments are all self-defeating to the point where his level of intelligence and verbosity indicate that it's not that he's stupid, it's that he is fundamentally divorced from the statements he made 30 seconds ago. Like there's a lack of, I learned that the schizo in Greek means separation, and like schism, schismatic. This guy has has a schism in his thinking. He is a schismatic thinker. There is no coherence to the things that he's saying. The aristocrats of the past have tried to curb these trends. What makes you think they'll succeed now? Do not come to gross simplifications. The relationship between the few and many is more dynamic. I'm not speaking of the warrior caste. I'm speaking of those in charge. The tripartite caste system is an outdated way of looking at the world. Rate the Simonians. That's probably some esoteric Christian thing. What did Guénon know about politics? He was a mystic. This is coming from the guy who said God is a nationalist, and he's decrying mysticism. Nationalism is a living force right now in this very moment. American, if you can, Europe is ruled by America, so I'm kind of tired of these Europeans being resentful. If you convince yourself to look the other way, there's no point in proceeding with this debate. The classes of industrial society are fundamentally different from what they were in the ancient regime. So tell me, why do you keep banging on about this tripartite division of labor, which is so insignificant? Kenneth got these ideas from Arvel, who in turn got these ideas from the perennialists. Okay, is that an argument? The perennial minds strictly do not understand the dialectics of modern society. As far as politics goes, they're out of their mind. That's just the ancient lie of the elites, the golden souls. It's charlatanism. The fundamental aims of modern society is one of production, not conquest. That contradicts what he said about America and China. Class has a completely different meaning. I don't care what your reasons are. Both fascists and Marxists live on outdated ideas whose creed is irrelevant, similar to nationalism. If I had to pick between Dumb and Dumber, well, the fascists are definitely dumber. Okay, so this guy is a Marxist, hyper-nationalist, anti-fascist. The contemporary battle is one between liberalism and nationalism. I mean, this guy, he's a liberal who hates John Locke, who believes all men are created equal, and we're endowed with rights by our creator to be nationalists, but he also it is the most, I think we're kind of exhausting the utility of this argumentation. As far as your mindset goes, I see more utility in astrology. Everyone wants to be a warrior, the man of action, then some noob be like, I'm the one of the Brahmin because I'm Volcel, nobody cares, let the zodiac determine your personality. If you really want to build some sort of construct to explain human behavior, use the 4 elements. My element is fire. What's yours? Amazing. My sun sign is Mars. He's the Martian archetype. Wow. So he's making fun of astrology, but he knows his sun sign. I don't know what my sun sign is. Remember that time you started talking about human anthropology? I'm a northerner. I'm very much anti-Norman. There we go. Northern English people. I can't say anything bad about them, but stereotype confirmed. Let's take a look. I gotta scroll up there because it scrolled down on me. There's still more. We still got to go through more here, and I'm probably gonna lose the battery at some point, so the video is gonna cut out on me. There's so many comments. It's very frustrating. This is because the big birds keep interacting with this guy, so I blame the big birds. Perennialist, class, personality. I'm a northerner. I'm not ignorant. How could I be? I'm a nationalist. Up until now, I've been making modern arguments. The rest of your claim going on beyond. Choosing to analyze the world how you please rather than how it is. Globalism is inevitable. Just change this channel to Borg Podcast. One way or another, you will respect the state. The state is a function of multinational, international forces. First, my doctrine is not organized based off class. Secondly, and yet he associates himself with Marxists. He doesn't understand class. He doesn't know what class is. Secondly, a faction can be a genuine mass movement. It's a Bolshevik idea. So he's a hyper-nationalist Bolshevik anti-fascist, with the exception that it shall genuinely compose of a proletarian minority, not middle-class intellectuals as they were. So he literally believes in Marxism but this time with less middle class support and more working class support. That's going to be the ticket. So basically, yeah, my doctrine is one of acquiring power. Yours isn't. Yours is one of bending to neoliberalism. It's not my fault if you want to keep wanting to misrepresent my ideas. Nationalism and proletarianism are a positive correlation. The leader of a national doctrine should be a proletarian. Yeah, Cromwell is he's a northern English proletarian by his own words. What a stereotype. I've never denied the existence of hierarchies. It's you folks who deny the significance of egalitarianism as a political force. I mean, if you think egalitarianism and hierarchy are mutually exclusive, the ideas seem contrary to the human mind, yet we've been validated by the march of time. Equality is rooted in the very nature of human beings. Again, very Lockean to say from a guy who hates John Locke. An individual aspires to equality just as much as he aspires to his own individuality. We've got that the Anglo here. These aspirations existed within our species long before we had capabilities of realizing them. Such things can be even observed in animals. Racism has attached to it an egalitarian quality. I actually agree with that. That's why I'm not on board the racist train. Never before has the inequality between groups been so obvious. European people should embrace the rule of unequal development or become the victims of history. If we didn't aspire to equality, then the politics of envy wouldn't be a thing. It's the most powerful thing left-wing movements have. I'm not winning to argue this with you. There exist dialectics within modern society. Our egalitarian ideals with increasing specialization as technology progresses is just one of them. If you wish to make boneheaded analogies to misinterpret every point, then that's up to you. However, the proletarian is a more stabler, more loyal, more patriotic force. It's a superior way of living. Beautiful. Beautiful. I think being naked is a superior way of living. I think nudism is a superior way of living. I think, living in the woods and eating animals, hunting for squirrels and making squirrel hats, I think that's a stabler, more loyal, more patriotic force, and I think it's a superior way of living. That's my opinion. Racism and nationalism are moral positives. It's more harmonic with nature. It conforms with the general will. I think he loves Rousseau. He loves the general will, but he hates John Locke. Look at this guy. I guess that's the difference between the rationalists and the empiricists. This guy, big rationalist here. My proletarian is not Marx's proletarian, so he's invented his own theory of the proletarian that is completely opposite to the way that proletarian is used by everybody else. So we've got a Kurt Doolittle guy here. I'm going to use terms that are popular and used by other people, but I'm going to give them a different definition and not explain or define my terms beforehand until we're already deep in the argument, and then I'm going to redefine everything. Marx's proletarian was a bourgeoisie individualist, which is not true. My proletarian is closer to the vision of Rousseau, the superior living of the plain man. Is this not the most pathetic thing you've ever heard? Does this not make you want to vomit? The superior living of the plain man. I mean, look, I can respect on some level the Amish and the plain man and that stable way of living life, but is that what you really aspire to? This is what nationalism is. This is what it is at the end of the day. Not only is my national doctrine in agreement with my proletarianizing, but it's the disposition of my doctrine, one which is essentially pragmatic, not built off abstracts divorced from reality. I don't have all day to play Ring of Roses with you. Quite frankly, I'm not willing to reveal a more complete version of my ideas. Oh, man. I'm not willing to come on your channel. I'm not afraid. I'm not willing to talk about my ideas. Yeah, I mean, this is just... this is what happens when you give Northern English people access to the internet. I hope there are some Northern English people listening who are not of this guy's ilk, because I hope not everybody fits the stereotype here, but it is something really bad. What matters is that this is not utopian. Neoliberalism is. Your attempts to subvert one of the most subversive ideologies. Liberalism has embraced and redefined various criticisms that have come running its way. The difference is I do not think it can survive the criticisms I'm willing to hammer at it. I do not think it can adapt to my criticisms. I know I am one of the people who he criticizes. I'm one of the people Kenneth complained about. I'm one of those people who hate black pillars because you lack the will and courage. The one thing we need more than anything is passionate people, not people like yourself. We have enough of those. Passionate people. You will see. Just remember, when the day of reckoning comes, do not knock on my door, asking what portion of the kingdom I shall give to you. He's typing from his basement. He's typing from his northern English flat. Passionately. Do not ask what portion of the kingdom I shall give you. He types from his northern English flat in the north of England, from his working class neighborhood. He types from his northern English flat supplied to him by the government. He types passionately. Just remember, when the day of reckoning comes, he types. He types as the urban youth run around his northern English flat. Do not knock on my door, he types. He types this as he lives off his northern English welfare. For I shall take what property you have left and give it to my loyal and faithful servant. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Automation is on my side. Wow, that's a big claim. I bet you'd be following my every tune if I had a YouTube channel. I'd love to hear this guy's voice. This would be very funny. I do engineering. Wow, I'm impressed. I'm impressed this guy has a job. I don't need your occupational advice. The world has need of experts, but the world cannot be governed by experts. Technocracy is an illusion. So it needs to be governed by the people. This is like if Kurt Doolittle was more stupid. You know, it's like sometimes you got to look at Kurt and you got to be like, look, he might have some problems, but at least he's not this stupid, right? You know, what happens when you take engineers and you like introduce them to politics and they're like, we must have a Marxist, anti-Marxist, equality, anti-Lockean, anti-fascist, hyper-nationalist nation state composed of empires. This is literally what it boils down to. I do a combination of electrical engineering and pure math. Yeah, this is what happens when you get pure mathematicians and you try to they try to socially interact with people. I may not be doing it forever. Doesn't matter. Enough of this small talk. Last time I brought up a personal detail about myself, you brought it up later for a gotcha point. Where's your superpowers now that you're in jail? So I guess this guy's been in jail before, and then he deleted the comment because that's kind of embarrassing. It's kind of embarrassing that you would go to jail for nationalism. It's kind of embarrassing that you would fall for that cult and sacrifice your personal interests for something that's not going anywhere. Persecution gives men superpowers. So this guy has superpowers. He's got God on his side. He's going to take from you and give it to his loyal servant on the day of reckoning. This guy, I think he knows, I think he works at Papa John's, actually. I think he's an engineer for Papa John's. I think he's been talking to Papa about the day of reckoning. He's a serious guy. Lenin, Mao, every one of them faced setbacks. I prefer to boast about my convictions. Oh, boy. Sport and math were my favorite subjects. I tried to be the best at everything. I enjoyed it anyway. Yeah. People said I was arrogant. That didn't stop me from getting straight A's. Amazing. No one has ever done that. No one has ever gotten straight A's in a Northern English school before. No one has ever gotten straight A's in a diversified Northern English curriculum. That's never happened. You literally have superpowers. The mind games belong to me. My original goal was to be a millionaire by 18, but by that time I had read Das Kapital and hated money. Oh boy. Oh my goodness. We're winding down here. We're reaching the end. I don't know what to say here. I don't even look at my bank balance. I just pay with my card and go about my day, stress-free. He's a rich Marxist. He is a rich Marxist. He is an anti-fascist nationalist. He is a pro-equality, anti-Lockean. Money will not make me. I wouldn't know what I know today without having experienced homelessness. So he's a homeless millionaire in jail, doesn't care what he spends. He's got superpowers. He's got God on his side. He's a Marxist. He truly believes in religion. He's a spiritualist and he's a Marxist. I'm prepared to gamble everything to see through my goals. Not going to give away my secrets. Kenneth is with Oprah and Michelle. I agree there. I am with Oprah and Michelle. I am strong and independent. That's the end of it. Let's see what good foods there are to eat. Someone has posted. I gotta load this up. Mastic gum. That's not food. That's not a good food to eat. I think people should just, instead of eating mastic gum, just chew like bones and stuff. I'm not even joking. Chew cartilage and bones. Don't buy boneless stuff. Eat the bones. Cook the bones, boil the bones, eat the bones. That's your mastic exercise. That's it. We're going to end it. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.